This week on Quadriga, 2015, a new role for Germany? The country's doing well, and most Germans are optimistic about the new year. But is there really so much to celebrate? Germany is still the economic powerhouse of Europe, but observers say that position of strength calls for more responsibility. In international missions, like in the Middle East or Central Africa, the US and other NATO partners want Berlin to play a bigger role. In combating Islamic State extremists, Germany is providing logistics and weapons, not manpower. In the Ukraine crisis, Germany emerged as a key mediator in the conflict with Russia, but it's been criticized for being too hesitant and too late. Generally, Germans seem to be more concerned with domestic issues like highway tolls, pensions, and taxes. Is the country ready to take on a leading role in the world in 2015? Your host this week, Peter Craven.
Yes, hello and a very warm welcome to this New Year's edition of Quadriga, where we're going to be talking about a possible new role for Germany on the international stage in 2015, about Germany's prospects in general in the year to come, and much else besides, I anticipate. To do so, I've got three excellent guests with me here in the studio, and I'd like to introduce them without any further ado, beginning with Leslie R. Collett. He's an American author and freelance journalist who has worked for some of the top newspapers. He knows Germany, especially Berlin, like hardly any other. After all, he has lived here since 1968. It is great to have you along, Leslie. Our second contributor is Judy Dempsey, currently writer and analyst for the Carnegie Foundation. Judy has worked for a host of international media outlets in a long and illustrious career. Judy, thanks very much for being with us today. And my third guest is Christiane Meyer, a very familiar face here on German TV. She's a correspondent and commentator for the ARD network. She's worked on the front line in Berlin politics, but also in Washington. So she has both an insider's and outsider's perspective. Welcome, Christiane.
Thank you.
That insiders and outsiders perspective might be a good place to start, Christiane, with my first question, just to sort of set the stage for us. Just give me your impressions about about Germany's international standing at the beginning of the year 2015.
Depends on the perspective. If you want to look at it from the German point of view, I think we are right now at a point of complacency. We feel good about ourselves, we feel good about our economy, we don't feel good about the international situation, but people are, and the latest numbers say that people are looking very optimistic into the future for their own life, not so much on foreign politics, but altogether it seems very, let's say, very happy. For Germany, that is unusual, but it seems like we feel good. I don't know what the perspective is from the other side, you know, because Germany is, as you said in the beginning already, or it was said, is regarded as the powerhouse, and people expect us to take responsibility, and we are reluctant, to put it mildly. We do not want.
Complacency and reluctance, they are going to be two words that I think are going to be used quite often today. I'm guessing. What do you two say?
Well, I would say that what you said about Germans having a feel-good factor alone is a remarkable development, because Germans were for long considered among the most pessimistic people in Europe, certainly, or worldwide anyway. And if Germans have a positive outlook about their own country and about the future of the euro, that would be quite a step forward, I would say. I remember coming to Germany in the 1940s and seeing a deeply, deeply pessimistic, downcast people.
Understandably.
Yeah, understandably, and over the years gradually has developed, with the help of leaders like Konrad Adenauer and now Frau Merkel, leadership like that has produced a country with a very positive outlook on the future.
The German people are always on somewhere on a continuum between optimism and angst.
I think actually the Germans are very, very worried about what's happening. Although you yes,
So that's the complacency again.
Well, it's not. No, it's first of all inside Germany there are a huge amount of problems. I mean, the wage levels have become so suppressed that an awful lot of people are living on social welfare, even though they have jobs. Of course, the employment rate is very, very high, but disguising this is, and nobody talks about this, is the growing poverty. I mean, there are growing social inequalities, but I mean, I think the government realises this. But there's something fundamental taking place in Germany. I think for the first time they realised that the old status quo in dealing with foreign policy is changing. And certainly Chancellor Angela Merkel is behind this, particularly with her role towards Russia. I think this is really very important.
If I may say so, it is being changed from, above down. So I think the Germans themselves would not like to change it a lot. They are sort of taken along by the government right now. And that is why it's such a long process. It started in the beginning of the year at the Munich Security Conference. And when all of a sudden the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Foreign Policy said, we are going to take over a bigger role in the world. And everybody said, what? What does that mean? Does that mean military? First idea in Germany is always, is that military? Does that mean we have to send soldiers? And so the whole concept is only developing. It hasn't been developed completely. It's just evolving.
It's a very good point, because who's the person that hasn't spoken about this responsibility? It's Angela Merkel herself. I mean, this is a politician who leads slowly, who analyses and weighs up all the risks and every pro and con of a situation. So she hasn't really replied to von der Leyen's speech in 2014, nor to President Gauck's speech, nor to Frank-Walter Steinmeier, the foreign minister's speech about this idea of responsibility. She actually is waiting to see how public opinion responds to all of this.
That's the key to it. She's constantly got one ear, 2 ears to the ground. She's listening, and she will change her position overnight if the latest polls will show that, in other words, what she said before was not getting a good reception. She did this with the Ukraine, for instance. She changed her position there. She's constantly doing it, but in very...
Just explain for the viewers how she changed her position, what you're alluding to there.
Well, originally she was going to sit down with Mr. Putin and sort of get the whole thing, settled more or less in Russian on top of it. And then she realized Germany is getting isolated here in Europe. And this is no position which Germany ever wants to be in, is to be isolated. The French were for more action. The Brits were for more action. Certainly the Poles were. She's surrounded by people who basically were irate over what was happening in the Ukraine. So she changed her whole position from what against sanctions for sanctions.
Well, actually,
and for sanctions meant she was doing something which was completely against her own basic instincts.
Well,
but she did it.
Actually, I beg to differ, because in fact France was very reluctant to take a tough line on Russia. It was Poland and Germany. And I think even before the Ukraine crisis, before this famous Vilnius summit in November 2013, Merkel was very much engaged in Ukraine with the former Prime Minister, the Tymoshenko case. But fundamentally, Merkel took stock of the new kind of foreign policy that President Vladimir Putin was exercising. And she knows him very, very well. And I think that sharpened her perception of taking a stance on Ukraine. And
also I think it was an evolving development, because Merkel and also the Foreign Minister Steinmeier, they were extremely disappointed about Russia. They felt they were not taken seriously, they were lied to, they were not sort of appreciated in their attempt to find a political, peaceful solution. They were just, each time they came to any kind of arrangement, it was not done. I mean, it was words, not deeds. So I think they came to a point where they thought, okay, we don't get anywhere with this politics. And then they took over more or less some positions of the Europeans. And I think it's still an evolving process, because we still think you have to have a dialogue.
Before we talk a little bit more about foreign policy, and there's an awful lot to talk about there, I'd just like to come back to this point about complacency, about the mood among the German people on the first day of 2015. Angela Merkel has, she has approval ratings which are absolutely astonishing, somewhere way above 60%, going up towards 70%. This despite the fact that she's now entering her 10th year in office. That's absolutely incredible. It's unprecedented. Do you believe that is... my feeling is that is... I mean, we've got two different opinions. You were arguing that the German people are feeling good as they look to the future. About their economy. And we're also hearing that possibly these approval ratings for Angela Merkel are because they feel that the Chancellor is doing a good job at protecting them, at sheltering them from a difficult environment.
Yeah. So you asked the question, you gave the answer. You are kind of right. It's ambiguous, and one part is, I think for many Germans, is she makes us feel safe. She is, Mutti is what they call, many politicians call her mommy. Mommy will take care of us. She's quiet, she weighs things, she's not overreacting, so she'll do it, we just leave it to her.
She's a safe pair of hands.
Yeah, right. And I said it's ambiguous because the other side of the story is, of course, what you said, Judy, is true, that Germans feel what's happening around them is horrible, all the crises we went through, Ukraine and IS and, all that is really something that makes us feel unsafe.
What is very interesting listening to you, Christiane, is that behind the scenes, what Germany has is in fact a modernizing chancellor. It's very difficult to put It's very difficult to put your finger on this, but if you look at what she has done to her own Christian Democratic Union party, which was a largely male, stuffy, Catholic, highly conservative party. Gradually,
this all done by a female coming from the East, a Protestant background. It's remarkable.
I often wonder sometimes, should she belong in that party? But
she's probably wondering about that too.
Yes, indeed. But she has pushed the consensus in the party, not only getting rid of nuclear energy, which affects the huge big parties, the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats. She has been very careful about opening the discussion about women on boards. She doesn't want to. This is typical how she does these things, and above all, and hats off, she hasn't pandered to the far right wing and these populist parties. And Germany has opened its door to hundreds of thousands of refugees, while the other EU countries haven't. Hats off to her for doing this and keeping the ship steady, because this could be easily exploited. And as we saw in the end of 2014, we saw it being exploited by this quasi-populist movement who wants the foreigners to go home.
Well, it's not to say, of course, that this has all been popular, this influx of
absolutely.
But relatively, of course, compared to the mood in Britain, for instance, or in France, for that matter, Germans, I think, are pretty tolerant of these newcomers. And the only thing that I worry about sometimes is their use of the word migrants. Migrants are somebody who, even in the third generation, they are referred to as migrants or immigrants, or the families of immigrants. When do these people finally get accepted into German society? This has taken now 50 years.
There is also, about the term migrant, there is a racial overtone, I often feel. I mean, I have children here in Germany who are half British and half German. Nobody has ever said to my children that they are migrants. If they were half Turkish and half German, they would be called migrants.
Would be automatically
What is the difference?
Well, just one point to pick up what Leslie was saying. I want to go on to this modernising aspect, particularly on the integration, because actually this coalition government is finally understanding that to actually integrate, to give the younger, and there's a huge number of young second, third generation German Turks a chance, they have to really start in the kindergartens. And this government, again, is the modernising aspect. It's much more inclusive government, which has surprised me, actually, and this is long overdue. And again, this is another aspect of the quiet, cautious, step-by-step approach. So we have the integration and other matters.
That's true, but to put one drop of water in the wine, I must say, of course, economically, we need them.
Exactly.
And that is a big point, you know, because we really have a demographic problem, and we are very happy, and we have to be happy to have, call them immigrants or call them new citizens, whatever you call them. Actually, that is a point of selling that to reluctant Germans as well, to say, you know what? These people are of economic advantage to us, you know, and that opens up the minds, not necessarily always the hearts, but it is one step.
Okay, before we talk a little bit more about the ever-intriguing Angela Merkel, the dominant personality in German politics, let's just have a look at this short film about Angela Merkel.
Angela Merkel is the world's most powerful woman in politics. For 9 years, she has been at the helm of the German government in varying coalitions. And since the euro crisis, she has been a leading force in the EU. But for many political observers, Angela Merkel remains a mystery. What makes her tick? She has managed to modernize her Conservative Party and make it attractive to new groups of voters. But her foreign policy seems to lack vision and a clear strategy, say critics. So where exactly does the watch and wait Chancellor stand?
Judy, I'd like to come to you because you are something of a Merkel. I think you're all Merkel experts, but Judy has written a book about Angela Merkel. Yeah, a lot of observers of Angela Merkel, media people, ordinary folk, tend to equate. They arrive at the conclusion: Angela Merkel is Germany, Germany is Angela Merkel. Are they right to do so, or is there much more to it than that?
Well, if you were going to go on that basis that Germany is Angela Merkel and Angela Merkel is Germany, then Germany is in very, very bad shape once Angela Merkel leaves the political scene. There
could be a terrible vacuum.
There is a vacuum in the Conservative Party at the moment, and
in the Conservative Party,
in her party, in the Conservative bloc, you know, she doesn't particularly like.
Von der Leyen is any kind of a successor?
Well, that's a different issue. The Defence Ministry is being Defence Minister is such a poisonous job in any case.
Yeah, but she's managed it so far.
So far. But you know, Merkel has also seen off an awful lot of potential opponents.
She has.
But I think whether she's aware of that, one cannot answer this. But I think from a negative point of view, I think it's unwise to equate Germany with Merkel, Merkel with Germany. But from the outside, that is how she is seen.
Mm-hmm. Leslie, you've been observing, you've been a Merkel watcher for an awful long time. I don't know what the word would be. I mean, we called people who looked closely at the Kremlin were Kremlinologists. I don't know. You're a Merkelologist, and you have been for decades.
Well,
yeah? Give us some clues about Angela Merkel. Yeah?
Ever since she came onto the scene, and that was in the first freely elected East German government in 1990, I sat opposite her among the journalists. She was the deputy spokesman for what was actually the East German version of the Christian Democratic Party. Under de Maizière was the name of the prime minister. He only reigned for 3 months. Mm-hmm. She said nothing the entire time. Absolutely not a single word any time that I was in the auditorium. Mm-hmm. And out of curiosity, I went up to her one day and I asked her a question, and I was absolutely flummoxed because she was extremely intelligent. And at one point she asked me, do you want to speak in English? And I thought to myself, she can do this as well. Anyway, it was a big surprise, but she kept her mouth closed for good reason. She was already making her shift to Bonn. She was on her way to Bonn, and this business in East Berlin, she had already left mentally completely behind her. She's a fast operator.
Interesting impressions. You've watched Angela Merkel from close up for a long time as well. This notion that she is Sphinx-like, yeah, that she is unknowable. Is it true?
It is true. I would like to remind you that when the Iraq war came along, she was not the chancellor yet. And she came to Washington, and there was a speech, 45 minutes long, in English, where she said if she was chancellor, we would be in the Iraq war. Mm-hmm. And now look at her now, you know. I mean, the reluctancy with which we are dealing with international crisis, always looking for political solutions. She changed that. She was then against the Iraq war, of course. So she can do that. Nuclear power. She changed her position completely from being in favor of it. And then the next moment after Fukushima, she said, no way, we are getting out. So these are rare occasions, but it happens.
Well, she's an adaptable person. I mean, the whole history of the family has been one of adapting to circumstances. From the beginning on, grandfather born in Poland, who had to adapt to the German rule in Poland at the time he became a German. Now, all this sort of thing goes, it's almost in the genes. She grew up in a family which was the father, a pastor, a priest, And he was extremely close to the government among the...
He moved from Hamburg in West Germany to East Germany.
Yeah, but may I say something?
Right. Now, adaptability, and that meant that the daughter of this man was equally adaptable. She she was never in opposition to the government. That's the main thing. She was never a dissident. She was a person who did what was expected of her. And what was that? She was elected to become the cultural person responsible for cultural affairs of the Free German Youth. That was the East German Youth Organization in the Humboldt University where she studied. An amazing adaptability.
Yeah, she dealt well with the circumstances, but if I may say so, she is really Machiavella, you know. I mean, this person, Angela Merkel, knows what to do with power.
Machiavelli.
Yeah. Yeah, the female form. The female form.
Yeah, okay, point taken,
and
yeah.
I would like, I mean, if I may illustrate, that she has tiny, subtle tools. One of the tools is that when she travels with journalists, she gives backgrounds, and she's funny, she is open, she is straight,
famously
and you
so.
like her, you know, you sit there and you like her, and she tells you stuff you can never write, you know, and she relies on the journalists not to. So everybody thinks he or she is close to her, but they're not, and she does that really well.
One final word on Merkel, or not a final word on Merkel, because, but I'd like to move on to this Germany's new role.
Good,
but let's go on.
Well, I think it's so complex, this question. But I think the Russia crisis, what's happening in Russia today, but particularly the Ukraine crisis, has catapulted Merkel into foreign policy. She wasn't really interested in foreign policy in her first two terms, leaving aside how Germany abstained from the Libya operation. Yeah. But Merkel's third term, leaving aside to the Euro crisis, is that she has discovered foreign policy. And you know what? She's pretty good at it. Oh, yeah. I mean, she has taken a stand, a highly high-risk political and intellectual stand vis-a-vis Russia. And the stand is this. I think Merkel, of all the EU leaders, with the exception perhaps of the Poles and the Baltic states, understand that Europe really has entered the post-Cold War era. And she's dealing with this now. And Europe, she keeps saying that we're in for the long haul with Russia and with Ukraine. And I think she's one of the first to realise that the parameters, the whole context now of the post-Cold War has ended. We are in a new era and we have to deal with it.
But it's a very risky strategy, I must say, very risky, because if you take the hard confrontational line, which is done right now, you don't know if you can take the Russians along. I mean, what is happening between Germany and Russia, not on the level of government, that's one level. The other level is the level of the people, and I think it's a high risk.
Yes. It is a high risk, but that's all the more reason why she has to explain what is at stake here. Because
she's not too good at that, though.
She is really, that's one of her weak parts. And, you know, close people, her close colleagues inside the Christian Democrats want her to take a lead, want to explain to the public. Don't let the others, you know, run rings around her. Do it and take the initiative. Right. And heavens, I mean, when she gives speeches to the Bundestag, you leave these speeches saying, well, really? I mean, is this leadership? So she has set the agenda, but she doesn't see through in terms of reaching out to the public.
Right, Christiana, I want to come back to something that you mentioned earlier. That is it's the title for our debate today, A New Role for Germany 2015, ? On the international stage. And what we're talking about is these comments we've had from senior German politicians, not including Angela Merkel, as far as I know, suggesting that Germany should adopt what is being called a more assertive, a more interventionist perhaps, a more gung-ho foreign policy. Yeah? Just tell us a little bit about where that's coming from, why it's important, before we then talk about, you know, how the German people are responding and how people outside Germany are responding. Gung-ho
seems a little simplified for me. I think the pressure from the outside, from the other European countries, made that happen because everybody, as you said before, says Germany is the economic powerhouse, so they need to take some kind of influence. And I think the idea is that Germany will be less militarily or sort of orientated than other countries, hopefully. But of course, von der Leyen, our Minister of Defense, she is a little bit, I mean, it's not a complete closed position. She's a little bit more on the other side. But then again, it was a big deal for Germany to send weapons to Peshmerga so they can defend
Kurdish fighters in northern Iraq.
So they can defend Kobane, a little place in northern Iraq. And it was an even bigger deal now to send 100 soldiers who are not fighting, but they're explaining the weapons basically to the Peshmerga. That's the idea.
Trainers.
They're supposed
training
to
function.
In German policy. It happens in very, very slow stages. You can barely see it happen. Sometimes you think nothing is happening, but it is. Below the surface, things bubble very, very. They're on low boiler.
But there's a big difference to all the other countries. Our army can only be sent into any kind of war or conflict or whatever if the parliament agrees. So whatever happens has to be prepared, has to be carefully explained, has to be discussed and discussed and discussed again before it comes to a vote. And if Parliament is not with her, she can forget about it.
So what about the great German people in all this? I mean, you say Parliament has to agree. That sounds very worthy indeed. But the German people have never agreed to Germany being involved in operations in Afghanistan, for example.
They've never. Well,
there's never been a majority.
And
There's never been a majority in Germany.
But she listens to the polls, and the polls tell her, "Don't go too fast." Take it.
The polls say we're against it, but we're not going to punish you for it.
Right, exactly.
Two things on this. I think it's, first of all, the record is that the German Parliament, the Bundestag, has never refused to extend the mission in Afghanistan, which is actually very important. And the anti-piracy missions, and they've never actually blocked a mission, which is very interesting. Now, actually, the public really don't know about most of the missions except Afghanistan, because it was the headlines, because it was casualties, and so on.
And Iraq now.
Indeed, and Merkel never wanted to discuss Afghanistan, and she rarely visited it, and finally she did. I think she made 2 visits. But Merkel knows Merkel's position is not unique in terms of what is taking place among other European leaders in Europe, and it is this. I think that they see that the force used in Afghanistan and in Iraq and in Libya, actually hard power hasn't produced the results. So the German people are not unique in this. It's not a pacifism, it's a skepticism that this kind of hard power intervention, the skepticism that it works, and Obama has discovered that as well. So it's a big problem for the West now.
Maybe.
Leslie, you're nodding at it.
I was just saying, Germany is expert at projecting its soft power. And it's done that so skillfully over the years that it has completely, the thought of even using any kind of hard power abroad is anathema to most Germans. And this is reflected in the government, this is reflected in policy, and it means, in other words, a token 100 soldiers here and a token 50 there to train, not to be in action, but to train Afghani forces.
But is it a problem or is it an asset?
It's an asset. It's an asset. But after all, I mean, Germany until the 1990s was paying money to the Western activists, to Brits, to the French, and to the Americans, because it didn't want to take part in missions, military missions. So it paid for them. It paid for them.
Well, on the other hand, the Red-Green coalition that was in power in the late 90s until 2005, they made the decision to send troops to Afghanistan, and they broke the taboo over the NATO mission, participating in the NATO mission in bombing Serb positions to protect the Kosovo Albanians.
We're overlooking one group of people in this discussion. I'm somebody who comes from a military background, so I'm sort of aware of this. The soldiers themselves, these poor men and women coming back from Afghanistan, where they've lost comrades, where they've lost a limb perhaps, where they've been traumatized, they come back to Germany, and all these wise, sceptical, pacifist Germans say to them, 9 out of 10 of the people they then meet say to them, what the heck were you doing there in the first place? It's a real tragedy.
Very little sympathy.
It is. Yeah, but then again, as you say, skepticism in Germany has been, is wanted. It's a wanted thing after the war to be skeptics against the war. We didn't want to have another war coming from Germany to any place in the world. So this is very deeply embedded in every German's mind.
You see that as a resource in international
yes,
diplomacy?
I do, because it's like a counterpart to all the gung-ho people who say we have to go in.
But all the others are saying to Germany, be like us, be like us. They don't, do they understand it, or are they ignoring it?
The German question, whenever any kind of crisis is, and we say we have to do something, we have to get in, the German question has 3 words. What, or 4, what is the strategy? And so many times we've seen people are gung-hoing in, and the strategy, where is it? Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, everywhere. So I think it's an asset to say, if we do something violently, then we really need to know how we have to get out ever. Is there an exit strategy? And what do we do to that country? What do we leave behind?
But, I mean, I'm in 2 minds about this, because we're getting into the issue of responsibility again. And our eastern neighbourhood and the southern neighbourhood are in absolute turmoil. And if, as Leslie suggests, Germany is good at soft power, actually it's very bad at soft power. It is very bad at soft power. Its police training mission in Afghanistan, which it led for several years, was a complete disaster.
Well, that isn't soft power.
It is soft. Training is soft power. They weren't shooting. This was training. The training of the judiciary, the rule of law in Kosovo and Bosnia has been absolutely miserable. Germany is not alone in this, by the way.
Soft power is the economic influence the country has.
Collectively, Europe, which values itself on a soft power, it falls very, very short in delivery.
Where I see a problem in the German sort of attitude is that whenever it comes to human rights, whenever people are Kobane, when people are in immediate danger, Libya, same thing, then the Germans come to a point where they say, oops, what do we do now? Because actually, are we supposed to help and defend human rights, or do we stand back? And I think that's an unsolved question in foreign policy. How do we behave in under these circumstances?
This doesn't just apply to the Arab world or to the current conflict in Syria and Iraq. What about, President Putin at some stage in the last year said I could be in Warsaw in quick time.
Yeah, theoretically.
What does Germany say to that? Germany says mediation.
We say think about it twice.
But what if the Russian president doesn't?
Well, actually, if push came to shove, I think NATO could rely on Merkel and Germany.
Of course.
And there's no doubt about this. Article 5, when a NATO country is under threat or attacked, there's no doubt in my mind that Germany actually would be a loyal ally in NATO and come to the defence of that country.
What does that mean with a Bundeswehr that is in the paltry condition that the Bundeswehr is in now?
Yeah, that's a different issue.
Yeah, a completely different issue. And
Judy is right. Germany would, of course, if it's a NATO thing, then Germany would be there, of course. But can we really fly? I don't know.
Well, von der Leyen, this is another debate which goes on and on about the modernisation of the armed forces.
Yeah, it's being taken care of, I hope. Yes. I think the modernisation is going ahead. It's a big issue. It's a big task. Yes. And it will not be overnight.
To put it mildly, I just wrote down, I wrote down a couple of figures, just so that our audience who are watching just know what we're talking about. Only one of the countries, Germany's 4 submarines is functional. Only 7 of 43 naval helicopters are operational, and fewer than half of the Bundeswehr's Boxer tanks. Yes. They're very important, battle-worthy.
And why? You asked the question why? Because simply Germany could not come to terms even with the remote thought of there ever being a threat to its safety, to its borders, or anything like that. After the collapse of the wall, this was it. This was going to mean hundreds of years of peace in Europe. And if threats came in Kosovo, you closed your eyes to them, somehow there's going to be a solution to it. If something in the Ukraine is happening, you close your eyes and hope that Putin will come to his senses.
Well, how great is your then personal concern that we might slide back into something like the Cold War around the Ukraine crisis? Because you've known Berlin Cold War times, very profoundly.
As far as invective goes, we've reached that point. It's there, but of course, the actual likelihood of Putin taking any kind of aggressive military steps against Western Europe is very remote. The man wants to remain in power, and the Russian army is in no state whatsoever to fight even the smallest offensive war, as we saw in Afghanistan, as we saw elsewhere. It simply isn't able to do that. So that Germany rests and hopes that if there is any kind of a disaster, there's always the Americans. they'll come to our rescue. Or the Brits.
The old story.
Or the Brits.
I think that is changing slowly.
So it's the same old story, this incremental change, very small increments.
The checkbook politics, we pay, they fight, that is, I think, coming to an end because it is too obvious. And it's not working anymore. And everybody else is telling us, you know what, you can't do that any longer. And you've lost your right to refer to the Second World War. And somebody said cynically, just because you killed, you think you cannot be killed now, which is a weird way of putting it, but still it sums up a little bit what's happening.
I agree with Christiana says. I mean, there is a incremental consciousness among the elites, certainly, the German public, that the comfort zone is not permanent. That's the first thing. Secondly, I just want to briefly mention the German armed forces. What the Minister Ursula von der Leyen is doing is actually saying to the public, this is what has happened over the last 20 or 30 years. And it's not just because of the end of the Cold War. There's been zero accountability and transparency over what they spent their money on and how the armed forces work. And I'm glad this is all out in the open now.
The whole procurement system.
Yes, the training system. And it's very good now that she's brought in outside consultants to actually say, this is the state of it. Finally, accountability is coming home.
Okay, we talked about Germany's a potential new role for Germany on the broader international stage, also as regards security issues and what have you. Time is running out. I know there is one thing I want to talk about, and I think it's extremely important. Germany's role as a leader, as the leader in Europe. What should we expect in 2015? More of the same, more calls for austerity and so forth that are meeting with stiff resistance from Germany's European partners?
Great question. If Angela Merkel is the undisputed leader of Europe,
which she is, it used to be the French-German tandem, but that's
another program.
Yeah.
If Angela Merkel really wants to go down in history, she has to crack the deal with the Americans over the transatlantic investment trade deal. This is just so important for giving impulse to a new Western liberal political and economic order. And so far,
yeah, exactly.
This is my point. She hasn't actually rallied for this so important agreement. And this vacuum has precisely allowed increasing opposition anti-TTIP in Germany and in other countries. It's particularly strong in Germany, even though Germany would be the biggest loser if TTIP didn't succeed.
TTIP is a very good example where it sometimes doesn't work to say, don't worry, I take care of everything, it will be fine. Because that one time, people looked closer and they said, hey, hang on, no, we don't want that.
German opposition to this trade pact is similar to German opposition and European opposition in general to genetically modified food. In other words, whatever argument you come up with, they're simply going to reject it because they don't believe that the other side has that their intent is actually.
However, I as a journalist talking to Deutsche Welle's international audience, I have to explain time and time again that all the negotiations are happening behind closed doors. Right. It's not a good signal. No.
Well, I'm glad you bring this up. At the end of 2014, I actually looked at the TTIP website run by the European Commission, which is leading the talks. And you know what? It was pretty open.
Yeah, except at the end of 2014. If you would have looked at the beginning of 2014.
Christiana, the good thing is that public pressure made it more transparent. Exactly. But this is going to demand an awful lot of leadership, and that's how I see 2015, Merkel's legacy, plus her relationship with Russia.
Well, hopefully her legacy won't be over by then.
It won't. She said she's going to run again.
Yes, so. but part of it could be next year, and 2015.
Well, a lot depends on the euro. What will the state of the euro be at the end of this year?
Well, the euro, we've got the trade pact, the transatlantic trade pact, but I'm also still concerned about this. Something we mentioned right at the beginning of the debate about. I mean, Germany is the European leader also because it is the European powerhouse. There are a lot of people, especially from the Anglo-Saxon quarter these days, who are saying, Germany is a waning force economically.
I don't think
Do you buy
that? No, I don't. No, I don't at all. I mean, we might be slow and sometimes old-fashioned, and sometimes reluctant to pick up on new developments. But I think we're pretty thorough, and I think that is the one idea I wouldn't share. I think we're pretty solid.
Because, as you're saying, the Anglo-Saxon corner, certainly the Brits were the ones who were always asking or telling the Germans, you need to reform your retail sector. Well, they certainly reformed their retail sector because discounters such as Aldi and Lidl are wiping out the British grocery trade, plus the cars and the rest of it. The Germans are not nearly as slow as one thinks. They wait and they perfect things. They may not invent them always, but they perfect them to the point where they're saleable around the entire world.
But still this point, Germany is accused time and time again of running Europe from Berlin, demanding austerity, not understanding the pain that is causing in other countries, and that is leading to huge breaches of trust. Is that going to continue? Is that the picture?
I think that's at least the way it is perceived, you know, and I think one of the reasons is that Angela Merkel is one of her deficits, I think. Doesn't show any sympathy, doesn't show that she really looks at other countries. Look at Greece, all the countries around us who are not doing as well. I mean, we are sitting here gloating how well we are doing, you know. We're having this black zero, you know, that we don't have any new debt, state debt.
For the first time since 1969.
We're showing this off like a religious artifact, you know. And how does that, you know, come over to other countries? Instead of saying, you know what, people, you are really not well off, and we are going to help you. We are going to help you to do better. And that is, even if it happens occasionally, it's not sold to anyone. So I think that's something to deal with.
Okay, the message I'm getting is that Angela Merkel is doing a pretty good job as the dominant figure in German politics, but she's not always explaining what she's doing well enough to the German people or to the European people.
Or to the European people.
Or to the European people. Quickly, each of you, if you could give Angela Merkel some advice, get on the phone to her on the first day of 2015 and say, Frau Merkel, this is what I propose for the coming year.
Just speak out more openly to the Germans and the Europeans, and, you know, don't do these boring Bundestag speeches. Show vocal leadership. You know, she's got a personality there. She can be funny. She's smart. She's quick. The Germans don't know their Chancellor.
I couldn't agree more. Talk to me. You know.
Talk to me.
Yeah,
Symbolism.
talk to me.
Symbolism and charisma are important.
And also
Angela.
use
the symbol would be if she got on Eurovision and directed a speech to all European countries in the Eurozone to tell them she has their economic future in her heart.
Okay, we're waiting for a big address from Angela Merkel, a big spunky address from Angela Merkel. That's your lot from Quadriga this time round. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye and tschüss.